Vivid verses.
I found on a Tuesday. Not because I went looking. I never go looking. That kind of surveillance requires a suspicion I've never been willing to cultivate of the low-grade paranoia that would hollow out the thing I was trying to protect. I found it because Renee left her phone face up on the kitchen counter while she went to answer the door, and the screen lit with a notification that I wasn't trying to read but read anyway. The way you can't help but absorb the headline of a newspaper someone else is holding on a train. Group, retreat house, Donna, just confirmed flights. So excited. Can't wait. I looked at it for 2 full seconds. That's all it took. Then I turned back to the cutting board and finished mincing the garlic. Renee and I had been together long enough that I knew the texture of her silences. Which ones were tired? Which ones were working through something? Which ones were her building toward a request she already knew I'd resist? We'd had a good run, and I don't say that sourly. I say it the way you describe a river you loved before the flood, acknowledging what it was before cataloging what it became. The retreat had been my idea. Mine alone. I'd mentioned it to her in passing 4 months ago. A week away, the coastal house I'd rented for the last 2 years running, a place I went to think without an agenda. I'd told her she could come this time if she wanted. I'd said it with the careful specificity of a man who means exactly what he says and no more. She could come, just the two of us, quiet mornings, long walks, no obligations. She lit up at that. I felt good about saying it. Now I was looking at a notification from something called Retreat House with Garden and doing math I didn't want to do. I kept my face neutral when she came back into the kitchen, which required no effort at all. Keeping my face neutral has never been something I've had to work at. What I work at is keeping the neutrality from becoming coldness, making sure the still water doesn't read as frozen. It's a distinction people rarely appreciate until they understand why it matters. Smells incredible, she said, sliding behind me and pressing her cheek between my shoulder blades. Almost ready, I said. Donna was her aunt. I knew that immediately, the way you cross-reference a database you didn't know you'd been building. Donna had come up 3 times in the last 6 weeks. Donna asked about you. I mentioned the house to Donna. Donna thinks you work too hard. And I filed each mention without comment, without knowing why I was filing it all. Now I knew why. The body is smarter than the mind. The body had been logging data. After dinner, I told her I needed to send some emails and sat at my desk in the small room off the hallway. I sat there for 11 minutes without opening my laptop. I was doing what I do when something needs to be understood before it can be acted on. I was running the tape. She'd built a group chat. That was the first fact. A group chat with a name and an emoji and at least one confirmed member. I had no idea how many members. I had no idea what had been said. What I did know was that the notification had read, just confirmed flights, and Donna's tone had been the tone of someone who believed the plans were settled. Donna did not strike me as a woman who made up her own invitation. I opened my laptop and looked at the rental confirmation I'd received 6 weeks ago. The house, my name, my card, 1 week occupancy beginning Saturday, 10 days from now. Then I pulled up the original listing and looked at it for a long time. The house slept 10. I had never thought about that before because I had never needed more than 2 bedrooms, and the extra capacity had simply registered as space, as breathing room, as the quiet luxury of a house that didn't press against you. 10 people. I thought about Renee's family with the detached efficiency of an anthropologist reviewing field notes. Her mother, her mother's 2 sisters, the aunt's husbands, the cousins who traveled in packs. I had met most of them once at a birthday gathering I'd attended as an act of goodwill, which had been loud and warm and entirely fine for 3 hours, and then had become, quietly but certainly, 3 hours too long. I had smiled throughout. I had been present and pleasant and had driven home in silence, not with resentment, but with the measured understanding that what restored them depleted me, and that was nobody's fault. That had been a Sunday afternoon. This was a week. My week. In my house, under my name, paid for with my money, conceived in my imagination as the specific antidote to exactly this kind of density. I closed the laptop. I didn't feel angry. I want to be precise about that, because anger would have been the simpler response, and I've never found simpler to be useful. What I felt was something colder and more clarifying. The particular feeling of watching a thing become what it actually was, stripped of the story you'd been telling yourself about it. She had taken something I offered, quietly expanded it without asking, confirmed 14 people in a group chat I hadn't been invited to, and said nothing to my face. That was the data. Everything else was inference. The inference I was most interested in was this. She was not going to tell me. She was going to wait until we were close enough to departure that refusal felt impossible. She was going to present it as a wonderful surprise, or she was going to let it surface organically. A cousin calling on the drive, a message notification I'd glimpsed the way I'd glimpsed this one, and she was going to read my face and decide whether to confess or to press forward, depending on what she found there. I knew this because I knew her. Not with contempt, with accuracy. She was not a cruel woman. She was a woman who avoided friction by outrunning it, who assembled the facts on the ground before anyone could object to them, who had learned somewhere along the way that it was easier to apologize for a done thing than to negotiate an undone one. She managed people the way a river manages terrain, not by force, but by persistence, by going where the resistance wasn't until the new path looked like it had always been there. I had let her manage me, a little. I had been fond enough not to notice or not to name it. I was naming it now. I didn't confront her that night. This is something people consistently misread about the way I operate. They assume that seeing clearly means acting immediately, that the person who knows what's happening must announce that he knows. I've never understood that impulse. Information is leverage, and leverage spent early is leverage wasted. There was nothing to gain from a confrontation on Tuesday night, except the conversation she'd been rehearsing and I hadn't, which would have given her every structural advantage. I went to bed. I slept well. Wednesday I worked and watched. Not obviously. I wasn't conducting a surveillance operation. I wasn't checking her phone or monitoring her effect with visible intensity. I was simply present in the way I'm always present, which is more present than most people are comfortable with once they realize it. She was cheerful. That was interesting. She was cheerful with the particular quality of someone who is holding a thing she is excited about. And I watched the cheerfulness and thought, she thinks this is going to make me happy. Not fully. She wasn't naive, but enough. She told herself a story in which I would be surprised, then resistant, then charmed, then grateful. She'd watched me soften before when confronted with her family's warmth. She'd updated her model of me incorrectly, concluding that my capacity to be pleasant in a situation meant a desire to repeat it. That was her miscalculation, and it wasn't small. Wednesday night she mentioned, carefully, that her mother had been asking about the trip. I said, and turned the page of the book I was reading. She seems really excited about the coast. I looked up from the page. Does she? Yeah. A slight pause. She loves the water. She mentioned it, I said, and went back to reading. I heard the silence that followed, the recalibration happening in real time, the sense that something hadn't landed the way she'd expected, and I let the silence do its work without filling it. That night, alone for 20 minutes before she came to bed, I made two decisions. The first was that I was not going to explain myself in advance. Not because I owed no explanation, I did eventually as a matter of basic decency, but because an explanation offered before action is a negotiation, and I was done negotiating this particular terrain. The right to take my own retreat to my own destination was not a point subject to compromise. Treating it as one, by explaining and defending and waiting to be granted permission, would have misrepresented what it was. The second decision took about 4 minutes to execute. I opened the airline's website, found a flight to a different destination entirely, a small coastal city I'd been meaning to visit, 600 miles in the opposite direction, and booked it for Friday evening, 2 days before the original Saturday departure. One bag, one night in transit. Then I booked a room at a small hotel I'd read about once, the kind of place with 8 rooms and a porch facing the water and a host who remembered your coffee order by the second morning. Checkout date, 8 days out. I closed my laptop and felt, for the first time in 3 days, something uncomplicated. It was the feeling of a decision made. Thursday was the interesting day. I worked through the morning at my desk, and around 11, I heard her on a phone call in the kitchen. Her voice low, but not inaudible, the particular quality of a call she wasn't hiding, but wasn't advertising. I caught 2 words, Saturday, and confirmed. I noted them the way a navigator notes landmarks. Neither surprised me. At lunch, she was quiet. Something had shifted slightly in her orientation toward me. A new attentiveness, a watchfulness she was trying not to make obvious. I thought she might be expecting me to bring something up. I thought she might even be hoping I would, so the conversation could happen on terrain she'd prepared. I talked about a book I'd been reading. I asked about her sister's new apartment. I was warm and interested and gave her nothing. Around 3 in the afternoon, sitting across the kitchen table from me with her laptop open, she said, "I've been meaning to talk to you about the trip." "Okay," I said. She looked at me. There was a particular thing happening in her expression, the way someone looks when they've prepared a speech and suddenly aren't sure it's the right one. I may have gotten a little excited and told a few people about the house. "A few," I said. "More than a few." She watched me. "My mom, Aunt Donna, some of the cousins." A pause. "I thought it would be fun. I thought you'd. I know how you feel about my family. I know you like them." "I do like them," I said. This was true. And the house is so big, and it felt wrong for it to just be sitting there with all those rooms. "The house isn't sitting there," I said pleasantly. "I rented it. For us." The us landed. I watched it land. "I know," she said. "I know that. I should have asked. I'm asking now." I looked at her for a moment. "How many people, Renee?" She had the grace to hold my gaze. 14, including us. 14. I'd guess between 10 and 12. 14 was worse. "How many have confirmed flights?" I said. A flicker. She'd expected surprise, or hurt, or protest. She had not expected that I already knew the shape of the thing. "Most of them," she said carefully. I nodded. I felt myself doing the thing I do when a situation becomes completely clear, a kind of interior stillness, all the noise falling away, leaving only the clean geometry of what is and what I'm going to do about it. "I appreciate you telling me," I said. She blinked. "That's okay. I was expecting—" "I know what you were expecting," I said, not unkindly. "I need to think about this." She nodded, and I could see the relief moving through her, the sense that the worst had passed, that she'd confessed and been received without explosion, that the difficult conversation was over. I recognized that relief. I had watched her arrive at it before in smaller situations, and I had let it stand because the situations were smaller. I stood up from the table and said I was going to take a walk. The walk lasted 45 minutes. I did not think about whether I was being fair. Fairness was not the organizing question. The organizing question was simpler. Was I going to spend a week that I had planned and paid for, in a house that I had rented for a specific purpose, surrounded by 14 people I had not invited because my girlfriend had made commitments on my behalf without asking? The answer was the same each time I returned to it. It had been the same since Tuesday night. No, I said nothing more about it Thursday evening. She tried twice to reopen the conversation, gently, with careful feelers, and I responded with warmth that gave her nothing to hold. I was not icing her out. I was not building a wall. I was simply present and unrevealing, which is its own kind of answer if you're paying attention. She wasn't paying enough attention. We ate dinner. She mentioned something Donna had said about bringing her famous potato salad, and I listened with the same pleasant neutrality I'd maintained all week. I watched something in her relax further. I think she decided the potato salad comment had been a test, and I'd passed it. People always think the test is the comment. The test is never the comment. Friday morning, I woke early. She was still asleep. I showered and dressed and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window for a long time, watching the light come in over the neighbor's fence. I thought about Renee, not strategically, not analytically, but in the way you sometimes think about a person when you're about to do something that will change the temperature between you. I thought about what I valued in her and what I had absorbed from her and what we had built together on good days. I gave it its full weight. Then I gave the other thing its full weight too. She had not asked me. She had not floated the idea. She had not said, "What would you think if?" She had not sent a message at any point in the week since she'd apparently begun this project. She had built a 14-person group chat called Retreat House and collected confirmations and flight details and begun receiving updates about potato salad. And at no point had she said a word to my face. I thought about what that meant. Not about her character. I was not here to adjudicate her character, but about the assumption embedded in the choice. The assumption that my preferences were negotiable in ways that hers were not. The assumption that I could be presented with a situation, and that if the situation was warm enough and well-meaning enough, I would settle into it the way I'd always settled. I had settled before, more than she knew I knew. I had absorbed small redirections and laughed off minor presumptions and let the river carve its path, because the path seemed pleasant enough and the friction didn't seem worth it. That accumulation had a name, and the name was this moment. My bag was already packed, had been since Thursday night, tucked in the back of the closet, the single carry-on that is sufficient for any week if you know what you're doing. I had already arranged for the house rental to be handled. A call to the property manager, a short and courteous explanation that there had been a change of plans on my end and the reservation would not be used. He'd been gracious about it. The guests, if they still came, would need to make their own arrangements. That part wasn't mine to manage. I wrote a note. Not long. 3 sentences on the notepad by the coffee maker, the kind she'd see when she came downstairs. Had to sort out a conflict with the trip. My flight leaves this evening. I've changed destinations. We'll talk when I'm back. 3 sentences. Factual, not cold. True. I considered adding something else. I turned the pen in my hand for a moment and decided against it. An explanation offered in a note was an apology, and I had nothing to apologize for. The note was a courtesy, not a confession. I left it on the counter. I went to work. She called at 2:47 in the afternoon. I was in the middle of something and let it go to voicemail. Not to punish her, because I genuinely had nothing to say yet that couldn't be said better in person, later, and because voicemail was a more honest container for the call than a live conversation I wasn't ready to have on a Friday afternoon from a work context. She left a message. 48 seconds. I listened to it once. Her voice was careful, controlled in the way that requires effort, the way you'd speak if you were standing in a doorway and weren't sure whether to step through. She said she'd seen the note. She said she wasn't sure what it meant and wanted to talk. She said her family was a pause, looking forward to seeing us. Us. I noted the word. I put the phone face down on my desk and went back to what I was doing. At 4:15, I took a car to the airport. My flight was at 6:50. I moved through the terminal with the specific calm of a person who has made a decision and is no longer in the part of the story that involves making it. She called again at 5:23. I was through security at the gate, a coffee I didn't need in my hand, mostly because the act of buying it had given me something to do. I looked at the screen for 2 rings. Then I answered. "Hey," I said. "What's happening?" Her voice was different now, not controlled, not feeler extending. She'd arrived somewhere more direct. I respected that. "I changed my plans," I said. "I'm heading somewhere else for the week." A beat. You already left?" "At the gate," I said. "I don't understand." And then, lower, "Is this because of what I told you yesterday?" "Yes," I said. The silence that followed was long enough that I checked the phone to make sure the call was still connected. "It was, I thought," she started. "I know what you thought," I said. "I've been watching what you thought for 3 days." Another silence. Something was reorganizing on her end. I could feel it through the phone. The particular quality of a person realizing the territory is different than the map they'd been using. "You knew," she said, "before I told you." "Tuesday night," I said. "Donna's notification." She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I waited. I was not going to fill the space to spare her. "So everything this week." "I was thinking," I said. "That's all. About leaving. About what I wanted to do," I said. "I decided I wanted this." A beat. "I reserved a room. I'm looking at a departure board. I'm going to have a quiet week in a place where nobody knows my name, and I'm going to come back, and we're going to have a real conversation about several things that should have been conversations and weren't." "You couldn't have just said something?" Her voice had an edge now, not sharp, but present. I thought this was the most honest she'd been all week, and I told her so. "That's fair," she said, after a moment. "Your family's going to show up to a house that won't have me in it," I said. "That's the part I'm sorry about. Not the shape of it, but the fact that they're going to drive somewhere expecting something and find something different. They don't deserve that part. You should call them." A long pause. "What am I supposed to tell them?" "The truth," I said, "or a version of it that's kind to them. That's yours to figure out." A beat. "I'm not trying to humiliate you, Renee. I'm not trying to blow anything up. I'm taking a week that I planned for myself, and you'll have to manage the part you built without asking." She was quiet for long enough that I heard my flight being called. The first boarding announcement, vague and crackly, the zone number I wasn't. "I'll call them," she said finally. "Good. And when you're back." "We'll talk," I said. "I mean that." "Okay." Her voice was smaller than it had been. Not beaten, but settled. The way a thing sounds when the distance between what was expected and what is real has finally closed. "Travel safe." "You too," I said, and ended the call. The seat was a window. I'd chosen it deliberately. I always choose the window, not from claustrophobia, but from a simple preference for having one direction of guaranteed openness. Something to look out at when the looking in becomes too much. We lifted off at 7:03. The city dropped below, lights arranged in their patient grids, roads running between them like the lines in a diagram of something I'd understood once and was now free to forget for a while. I watched until the clouds took it, then settled back and closed my eyes. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be precise about that too, because triumph would have been as useless as anger. What I felt was what I always feel in the immediate aftermath of a clean decision, a kind of spaciousness, the way a room feels after you've moved the furniture that was in the wrong place. There were things to reckon with when I came back. I knew that. The conversation she and I needed to have wasn't small. It was the kind that restructures things, that requires both people to say sentences they hadn't finished forming yet, to arrive at an account of what the relationship was that might differ from the one they'd each been living in. I was not afraid of that conversation. I had been in enough of them to know that the difficult ones, when both people stay honest, are the only ones that mean anything. What I had avoided was the version of that conversation that happens under duress, in a crowded house, surrounded by people who mean well but take up space, with no room to be truthful and nowhere to go when you need to be alone. That version wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. I had excused myself from the performance. The cabin lights dimmed. Somewhere over a stretch of dark water I couldn't name. I ordered a sparkling water I didn't particularly want and drank it anyway, watching the wing light blink its patient red into the nothing outside. The hotel was everything the listing had promised, and a little more. 8 rooms as advertised. White plaster walls. A porch with 2 chairs and a small table between them, facing the water. The host, a compact man with close-cropped gray hair and the unhurried efficiency of someone who had stopped needing to prove anything, showed me to my room without excessive pleasantry and asked if I'd need a 7 or 8 o'clock breakfast. 7:30, I said. Coffee preference? Black, I said. Strong. He nodded once, the way someone nods when they've received information they'll actually use, and left me to the room. I stood at the window for a long time. The water was dark and the lights on the far shore were few, and the sound the waves made against the stones below was the sound of something patient and indifferent and completely reliable. I opened the window halfway and let the salt air come in and sat on the edge of the bed and thought about nothing at all. That's a skill most people never develop. The capacity to occupy your own mind without agenda. To sit inside a quiet moment without filling it with planning or rehearsal or review. I had worked at it for years. It remains the thing I am most grateful for. I did not check my phone again that night. Not because I was avoiding anything, but because there was nothing on it that required me until I decided it did. The water kept talking to the stones. I slept without dreaming, which is the best kind of sleep there is. Saturday morning, I was on the porch by 7:15 with coffee that was exactly what I'd asked for, strong enough to mean it, no ceremony about it. The host brought it out, set it on the small table, said the weather would hold until early afternoon and then probably wouldn't, and went back inside. I thought about how much I appreciated a person who gave you the information and then left you with it. Renee had called again. The notification was there when I finally looked, 11:47 the previous night. No voicemail this time, just a missed call sitting there without commentary. I thought about what was happening at the original house right now, or wasn't happening. The cousins who confirmed flights had, presumably, received a call or a message in the last 18 hours. Donna's excitement about the plans had been intercepted somewhere in the gap between confirmed and arrived. The explanation Renee had to give, whatever shape it finally took, was being given, was being absorbed, was producing whatever response it produced. I felt for them, the family members. Not acutely. They were capable adults who would regroup and make other plans, but genuinely. They had signed on for something and had their expectations changed by a situation not of their making. That was unfortunate. I had said so to Renee, and I meant it. But I had also been a person whose expectations had been changed by a situation not of their making. And I had managed it the way I manage things, by moving. The coffee was good enough that I considered the morning. I had a week. I had a porch in a small hotel and a coastline I hadn't been to before. I had no obligations and no agenda, and no one expecting anything of me for 8 days. I thought about Renee, not strategically, not in the mode I'd been operating in all week, but in the older, softer mode of someone who has been with a person long enough to know them in their best light. She was warm, genuinely warm, not performed, the kind of warm that means something because you can see the attention behind it. She made people feel seen in ways I sometimes envied, having my own different relationship with visibility. She laughed fully, with her whole face, and it was never performed either. She had a way of sitting in difficult conversations, once she finally got into them, that was honest in a manner I respected even when she was wrong. She had made a significant miscalculation. I was not in the habit of treating significant miscalculations as indictments of character. What I was in the habit of was naming them accurately, which she and I had not yet done together. That conversation was coming. I was not dreading it. I was in some specific and unfamiliar way, looking forward to it. The version of it where we were both honest, both out of performance mode, both willing to say the sentence we'd been avoiding. I did not know what she would say. I knew what I would. I would tell her what I'd told her in every relationship that had gone the distance, and in the two that hadn't. That I was available for everything real and unavailable for everything managed. That the version of me she could have was the accurate one, attentive and committed and capable of real warmth. And that the managed version, the one reshaped by accumulated assumption and preemptive engineering, was not a version that existed. That I had let her think it did, briefly, by allowing small redirections to pass without comment, and that the responsibility for that was mine as much as hers. I would tell her I was not interested in ending things. I would tell her I was interested in starting the actual relationship, the one underneath the one we'd been performing. I thought she might be ready for that. I thought Tuesday night might have finally delivered us to a place where both of us could stop performing. The morning was very quiet. A bird I didn't recognize made a sound over the water, and I watched it go until it was gone, then looked back at the horizon and drank my coffee and let the day do whatever it was going to do. Sunday the rain came in, as predicted. I spent most of it inside with a book I'd been meaning to read for a year and managed 70 pages before the light got bad enough to stop. The host's wife, a tall woman who moved through the kitchen with the efficiency of someone who had stopped finding cooking interesting a long time ago, but still did it better than anyone else, left a bowl of something on the small table outside my door at noon with no announcement and no expectation of comment. I ate it at the writing desk by the window, watching the water change colors as the clouds moved over it. Gray, then greenish, then a particular blue-black I'd never seen before on water, the color of something that had made up its mind. I thought about beginnings. Not the beginning I just left behind, but the one that was coming, the return, the conversation, the choice both of us would make about what kind of thing we wanted to be to each other. I had never been afraid of those junctures. I had been afraid of arriving at them too late, of letting things calcify past the point where honesty could reshape them. I had made that mistake once in my life, in a relationship I'd held together through sheer inertia until it finally collapsed under its own accumulated weight. I learned more from that collapse than from anything that came before it. I was not going to make it again. The rain kept coming. I turned the page. Outside, the water moved the way water moves, without intention, without agenda, incapable of becoming anything other than exactly what it was in every weather, under every sky. I thought that was probably enough of a lesson for Sunday afternoon. I turned another page and read. Monday morning I called her, not because I'd arrived at a conclusion, but because I'd been thinking about what she'd sounded like at the gate on Friday. The way her voice had reorganized itself into something honest and direct once she understood the territory was different than her map. And I wanted to hear that voice again. Not the managed one, the one underneath. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey," she said. Her voice was tired. Not the kind of tired that suggests defeat, but the kind that comes after a long weekend of explaining yourself to people who love you and don't fully understand. "Hey," I said. A pause. "How's the hotel?" "Good," I said. "Really good, actually. Small place. Faces the water. The host leaves food outside your door without fanfare." I heard something in her. Not quite a laugh, but close to it. The pressure shifting. "That sounds like exactly what you needed." "It is," I said. "My family is fine," she said. "In case you were wondering." I told them there was a miscommunication. Donna was at a beat. Donna was upset. The others were mostly understanding. "I'm sorry about Donna," I said, and meant it. "She'll recover." Another pause. "I've been thinking about what you said." At the gate. "Which part?" "The part about things that should have been conversations." I waited. "I'm good at not having those," she said. "I know that about myself. I'm better at it than I should be." "I know," I said. And you let me do it more than you should have. I did, I said. That's mine. The line was quiet for a long moment. Not the uneasy kind, but the kind that means two people are occupying the same thought from different angles. When you come back, she said finally. Yeah, I said. Can it be different? It was a real question. Not rhetorical, not performative. The kind of question someone asks when they're willing to hear a real answer, including one they don't like. I looked out at the water. Gray again today, flat and patient. The horizon a clean line between two shades of almost the same color. I think it can be, I said, but only if we're actually having the conversation, not the polished version. I know, she said quietly. Then yes, I said. I think it can. We stayed on the call for another 20 minutes. We talked about small things, the book I was reading, the bird I'd seen Saturday morning that I still hadn't identified, something that had happened with her sister that had nothing to do with any of this. It was the most ordinary conversation we'd had in weeks, which made it, in its own way, the most important. When we hung up, I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I set it face down on the table and went to see what there was for breakfast.
Thanks for listening.